pretty much, if you have a dream, you have anything in your heart, a passion, go for it. Just be open. Put yourself out there. That's something that I'm doing right now. I'm building my brand. I'm realizing that I am a brand. You do have value. You do have a lot of things that you can teach people. So whatever that gift, that talent that you have, be open about it and help other people. What advice would you give to someone who, may be afraid to take that leap of faith, or afraid to start that business, or something that's holding them back? What advice would you give them?
First advice I would give them is don't spend your time talking to people who've never done what you're trying to do. And that because often it's because they're fearful for you. They're afraid you're going to make mistakes and you're going to ruin your life and things like that. But when you have that spirit and a desire, it's kind of almost like an addiction. It's kind of hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
One thing that's funny about that is that, like I said, the spirituality was the first thing. I actually didn't get baptized until I was 61 years old.
Oh, wow. I know that.
My family, everybody in my family was very, very religious, very spiritual. And I had this thing that organized religion thing just really wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And when I started looking at my life from the one thing perspective, and I said, spiritually, what's the one thing I need spiritually? And I feel that the 7 circles we talk about in the one thing, they're like building blocks for your life. So if you're not spiritually knowing where you're going to go, if you don't know what's going to happen to you, or don't feel comfortable in what's going to happen to you when it's all said and done, I think you need to work on that, because that's going to last longer than what we're doing right here.
Welcome to the Horizontal Market. I'm Taylor Brown, and I'm here with Pam Miner. Me and Pam, we met 3 years ago. We met at PTAC, actually, and came into the office. And I came as a small business owner, wanted to learn more how I can grow and build my business. So Pam actually works with government contracting. She's doing that for the majority of her life. She's also an expert in photography. She's done photography, IT. She's very knowledgeable. She's a business consultant. She helps me with my business. She's more than just a friend. She's a mentor, a life coach, and consider her family. So thanks for coming on the show, Pam. And we're just gonna talk. So first question, for people who may not know who you are, where are you from? What's your background? And just for people who don't know who you are.
Okay, I can answer that pretty simply. I'm just a city girl from Baltimore. Grew up in Baltimore, and I then went off to college. Actually, my first foray into college was in a place called Ripon, Wisconsin. And I, after a year of study there, matriculation there, I decided to change my major because I went in thinking I was going to be a lawyer. And then I decided that could be a little lengthy process. And so I decided to transfer to Towson State University just outside of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. I got the degree in mass communications. That's where my love for photography and videography took shape, even though it looks a lot different than what it looks like today. I mean, we had film and things like that.
Yeah.
And I got out, and it was in the height of the first serious recession of my lifetime, and in the 70s. And I could not find a job in mass communication without probably moving to a small town, very north, very south, very west. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I actually was newly married and got married right after college. Mm-hmm. So we had 2 careers. We were trying to figure out what made best sense. And so we decided to stay in the Metro DC area. Mm-hmm. And so I looked at other avenues for me.
Okay.
And I decided to get into computer science. It kind of found me. It was an opportunity at an environmental earth science firm I was working at. And I thought that seemed like an up-and-coming career, computer science. And actually, even at Towson at the time, they didn't have a computer science degree, so that kind of dates me a little bit here. So I started getting involved with computer science, programming and things like that.
Yeah.
After that, doing the programming thing, I actually started working in some small businesses, and that's where my interest came. The first small business I started working for that was a minority firm. It was an 8A firm. It's a little firm called Network Solutions, Inc. And they had the first contract for domain registration, and the internet was born.
Wow. So you seem very knowledgeable of a lot of different ranges of industries, but how would you explain what it's like to be a business owner? I know you own your own business, you had employees, so how was that experience, just owning and running your own business?
Well, owning and running my own business has been quite the ride, and I've become a serial entrepreneur, actually. And what I found is that it's a lifelong endeavor, and it's a constantly moving environment, because I decided to go into government contracting, and that has its own kind of circumstances that is constantly changing with rules, regulations, administrations change, and what is acquired, or the acquisition procurement process changes. So you have to be constantly, if you didn't want to be a life learner, small business, government contracting should never be anything you want to do. If you just want to be in a nice little comfort zone and work your 40-40 plan. Yeah. 40 years, 40 hours, and then retire. Then government contracting and small business ownership, let me put it that way, is not what you should be looking at.
Yeah. And we talked about that, even myself, just doing the work is, what most entrepreneurs want to do is do the craft, whether it's photography, videography, but the back end work is the most important part.
It's the business of business is business. And that's a saying that kind of stuck with me, because you don't want to think about doing stuff for money, but without money, your business can't run. And the service and the good you can do for yourself and your community, your family, is generating the revenue that can keep your business going. So you got to and the way you do that is you keep, like I was talking to Taylor earlier, we were talking about how you got to have the right team. And as in the Good to Great book, he talks about having the right people on your bus. You're never going to be good in business without having the right team, because you can't know everything. I can't know the business, the accounting, and keeping on top of my craft is a little thing, and that I can't really realistically do if I'm also running a business, if I'm hiring, if I'm an HR person, if I'm wearing several hats. I'm wearing the HR hat. I'm wearing the business development hat, the capture management hat, and then I'm coding on the weekend and in the evenings. Right. So you got to figure out how you're going to put your structure together. It's the systems and the processes that you put in place that will make all the difference.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about some of these cameras here. I know we did a little preview before. We showed some of these cameras off, but you can just walk me through each camera and the significance of it, and maybe why you got it, or how they work, how they function.
Well, some of them I actually got from my early time in photography, and especially this first one over here, the Mat 124G, which was a portrait camera, and I got involved in doing portrait photography, and it's a little box camera, and it had a larger landscape platform for your image to be captured. Okay. And it had it was like the best camera for portrait photographer at that time, and that was in the 70s. And then I moved to which I actually have another one over there that we don't have here, into regular film camera.
Okay.
And with that, you had to get your film. You had to have a dark room. I had a dark room bag. I mean, it had everything, all the little toys and stuff that went along with it. I found out I'm a bit of a gadget freak before there was lots of gadgets out there.
Yeah.
So, and I found out I kind of got that from my mother because when she retired, she became a photographer herself.
Okay.
As well as she would fix computers in the neighborhood for the other seniors in the neighborhood. She's no longer doing that, but that's what she took on doing.
Gotcha.
So some of these cameras actually came from her or some of my relatives. Like this camera came from my great-grandmother.
Okay.
This camera came from my great-grandmother as well. And I believe this one came from my mom.
Wow.
So it's kind of like camera legacy world.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So I wanted to ask you, I know you're One Thing certified.
Yes.
For people who don't know, what is the One Thing?
The One Thing is it was a book written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And they wrote the book, and it's really talking about focus. So the name, The One Thing, is kind of misleading because we look at the first thing we learned in the One Thing in the process of becoming certified and getting mastery in the area is that there are 7 areas of our life that really make up a complete life. And if you want to look at having a whole life, because the One Thing is about identifying at the time what's the one thing you need to get going and keep growing in order to get the life that you want for you and your family, your community. So the 7 areas are spiritual, physical, your physical health.
Right.
We talk about personal. And personal is an interesting one because you often ask people about who are they personally?
Right.
Who are you?
Right.
And a lot of times people, they don't talk about who they are. They talk about the roles they play in society.
Right.
Their wife, their mother. I'm a programmer. I'm a photographer. I do these things.
Yeah.
But that's not who you are.
Right.
That's what you do. And you need to take time and understand who you are and make sure you're satisfying the dreams and goals in that part of your life.
Yeah.
After personal, you look at your key relationships. Life doesn't have any real meaning without having real relationships and making sure that you keep those relationships going. Because what happens if you focus completely, and it used to happen quite frequently in the old days and the more traditional generations where the father left the home, he worked. The kids grew up and barely knew him because he wasn't there to interact and build that relationship with the children because he was so busy earning that income, which that was a requirement. That was a kind of like a lifestyle at that time.
Right.
So after you have your key relationships organized, you have a job for the most part. So you have to make sure that in order to keep that job, you want to keep your skill sets up and going and expanding, and that lifetime learning kind of thing comes into the job area. And then for some of us who have businesses, then there's the business area that you need to make sure you stay on top of that, because that business will have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you need to pay attention to and make sure that you'll stay on top of those. And lastly, and it's interesting that it's the last thing, is finances. And with the One Thing, we don't really talk about an order. I went through an order of 1 through 7, and those kind of work for me.
Okay.
But in reality, it depends on what the priority for you are in those areas, and when you work on them, you need to work on all of them over time to get a rich and rewarding life.
Right.
But you don't have to work on it in that order. It depends on where you are in your life. Like for me, the number 1 made sense spiritually for me because I had moderate success. I mean, I had a company. I had up to 30 employees and things like that, and had government contracts, and I did government contracting for over 25 years.
Yeah.
And but things happen and life happens, and illnesses happens and family members come and go. Your marital situation may come and go. So those things can change the trajectory of what you're going and where you're going with your life. So you have to keep that good balance going so that you're strong enough to weather the storm.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I want to ask you more. I know we both know you're working on a course about government contracting. So if you could just share with people who don't have a clue or don't know how to get started or what to do, what are just, a few steps to do, and where should they, look forward to your course?
Well, I'm actually developing a course that I'm going to be releasing on the Udemy site and platform. And it's a class that I'm calling GovCon, for government contracting, from soup to nuts and everything in between.
Okay.
And that's because we often hear these little sayings and stuff, and we say them, and we're not really sure what we're saying. Yeah. And when we look into them, we become surprised at how in-depth it is. So the term soup to nuts sounded kind of strange to me, and people use it, and I've used it and never really paid attention to it. So I just said, let me look into what soup to nuts, because it sounded like beginning to end, from alpha to omega. Right. And that's really what it does mean. Okay. And when you talk about a full course from the 1800s, a full course could be up to 10, even up to 20, they say, 20 different courses. They say starting from soup to nuts, but it really started with appetizers, but I guess soup to nuts sounded better. So with that, you have your soup, you may have your your appetizers, you have your roast, you have your vegetables, then you have desserts, and you get to the end of it, you got a nice little glass of port wine and nuts. And that's how it's described if you look up soup to nuts on Wikipedia or go online. It talks about from that stage. So when you decide to have a formal dinner, back in, it's not just the menu. Right. And the menu is pretty extensive when you think about a 10-course meal. Right. But also you got to worry about what are the place settings, what are the beverages throughout those courses. Who am I going to invite? Because it was a pretty lavish event for most people. It's not like we go today, throwing our jeans and go over to TGIS or F's or whatever. It was a formal thing. So that's what I thought about, and I said that, really, government contracting is a soup to nuts kind of thing. It's quite broad, quite enhanced, and you need to really look at it from beginning to end before you start. And a lot of times we have a skill set. Like I've heard people, even if you look at E-Myth, they talk about the baker. So you love baking cakes and pies, and your family convince you, oh, you should go into business. You could make a lot of money making. But then, and you love baking because you like the feeling it gives you when people are enjoying your meals, right? Right. Just like I know when I do photography, it was great because I could take a photograph that would capture almost people's soul for that moment in time, because photography is about an instance. So, and that was a great feeling when you can see what a person is feeling. It's showing in his face, it's showing in his action in that instance. Well, what you need to do is to be able to broaden that and know, how do I take this and make sure that I can continue to capture that and not just live for that moment. Right. And grow my business. Right.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask you, because I know, our relationship is, considered like the boomers and the millennials. Talk about, how do you see those different times and different ages? How do you think, we work together, or those ages work together?
Well, it's funny you talk about that, because I was taking another kind of life development class, and I was looking at how can I figure out, because this was when I first realized the first time in history that you had 5 generations working together for the first time. And then you always hear people talk about, oh, those millennials. And then those millennials are saying, when are these boomers going to quit? And so forth and whatnot. And poor Gen Xers, they just like hung out there in the middle. Don't nobody know what to do with those folks. And I even did a thing. I took a test, like an assessment of what generation do I really fit with? And I'm sure it was just primarily due to the fact that I have a technology background and computer science degree, that I really fit more with millennials than I do with boomers, because I like the gadgetry, I like the technology and whatnot. So with that, but I also, because I'm in the technology and because I solve problems with computers and programming, I always knew that there was always more than one way to solve a problem. And based on people's thought process, which comes from their learning and living experience, a problem could, if I gave 10 people the same problem, I could come up with a result that was the correct result, but the process in which they got there could be 10 different ways. So that's the same with generations. Like with you and I think work together really well, because I do have that early photography, videography background. So I have an aspect of it that you don't have, you would never have. You would never have this kind of computers, cameras in front of you. So we work together and there's stuff you showed me that's been really kind of cool, even the technology we're using today with the camera that we're using today. It's just been mind-blowing how technology, it's blowing your mind, and this is your generation. So that's the whole thing and we can learn. So I was creating a board game that had the generation, it required 5 generations to solve a problem together. It wasn't a board game where an individual could win. Only teams could win. And each team had to be representative of all of 5 generations. And they bring their wisdom from their generation into the results.
Cool. Pretty much, if you have a dream, you have anything in your heart, a passion, go for it. Just be open. Put yourself out there. That's something I'm doing right now. I'm building my brand. I'm realizing that I am a brand. You do have value. You do have a lot of things that you can teach people. So whatever that gift, that talent that you have, be open about it and help other people.